was what I think Happy Community Builders is trying to achieve. And this conversation is going to be about one particular topic of that, I think. So Happy Community Builders is where community builders come together, people who are active in making their communities better, and provide peer support to each other. They put on workshops for each other, they share information with each other, they look for opportunities to collaborate, they give each other moral support when things are getting tough, those sort of things. But it also is there to have a collective voice. We're not quite at the stage where we're using this collective voice yet, but to have a collective voice that hopefully is strong enough that it gets listened to by policymakers. And Letitia last time was giving us some really good advice on how to engage in that process. So the general consensus amongst Happy Community Builders is that society has growth in gross national product or growth in the economy as the #1 priority. And that often causes harm in community. And so the people out there in the communities who are doing the hard work of trying to make the communities better are often going uphill because the way economic growth has as a first priority, it gets in the way of what they're doing. So one of the things that Happy Community Builders is tending to do is have a collective voice from people who have the experience of what those policies cause in their communities, as a way of lending their voice alongside of other strong voices, like Mark Carney, for example, is one of them, that we should be placing humanism above economics, and that economy there should be there to serve community rather than community there to serve economy. So that's kind of a quick overview of what the Happy Community Builders is aiming at. And I thought the topic today might be, and I'm glad you're here, Letitia, because you have more wisdom than for sure I do in this. But I thought but before we do that, maybe we'll just say hi to Sean here, who's arrived. So hi, Sean.
Hi, apologies for being late. I was at another Zoom.
Yeah, we all live in a world of Zoom these days. Where are you from?
In Guelph, Ontario.
Guelph. Oh, we got somebody in the middle. So Lynn, Anne, and Letitia are from the Vancouver area. I'm from Nova Scotia. And so now we got somebody in the middle of the country.
Perfect.
So do you guys want to do a quick introduction of yourself? We know where you are, but maybe what you can do is just speak about your interest very quickly, about community, what your interest in being on the call is about.
Fair. I'll go. I'm really an amateur community building. I don't have really any experience or skills with it, but I have an interest, and I love this community of Guelph that I live in. And I'm starting to open my eyes to what can be done, and I have a vision of having more walkable, less car dependent kind of communities, and I'm working on that.
Awesome, thank you. Anne, what's your interest in community?
Hi guys. So again, I'm from Toronto, but I'm now based in Langley, BC, and this is my first time joining. And the reason why I decided to join was, so just a little bit of background. I'm in finance, and I'm trying to pivot into or expand into sustainability, and with it comes with community building. But I don't actually have. So I'm trying to build a network or connections with people who are in that system.
Awesome. You're going to meet some awesome people on this call. I know some of them from before, and you're going to meet some really awesome people.
Oh,
Lynn?
fantastic.
I think my interest was born out of wanting to build a healthier community, and we live in a smaller community. It started off looking at housing, but I just recognized that there's, we need the spirit of the community involved, which sounds like a very large and intimidating one. But one of the things I've been doing is, and kind of successfully, has been really when I'm on Facebook neighborhoods, which at times can drive me crazy, but other times I'll talk about strong neighbors, giving people kind of other resources. And so slowly, I think people are kind of responding to that. And then recently there was someone who had just out of the whim decided to have a women's night, games night. And she said she was expecting 3 or 4, she got 100. So I talked to, I know, right? So I thought that those are not feel-good stories, those are community stories. So it really is trying to highlight that when people kind of going, oh my God, it's homeless, or this is awful. It's like, hold it.
Awesome.
There's this chunk that I want to, Anyway, that's what I'm doing and
Awesome.
muddling about.
Leticia? Awesome.
Thank you. I'm Leticia Sanchez. I am the Vice President of Heritage Vancouver.
Thank you so much.
I like to work with communities. And I think that when we talk about heritage, we sometimes think about just buildings and houses, but the part that interests me more is cultural heritage and how to preserve that cultural heritage, how to support the sense of place. Quickly.
Awesome. Just on a quick note on that, right after this, I have to go to my neighbor's birthday. She's turning 102. That's heritage.
Oh yeah, I think that heritage, it could be what we eat, what we like, what we remember, memories, and it's important to preserve. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to welcome Jeanette in here first, and then I'll come back to you, Casey. Jeanette, welcome to the Coffee Connections, Happy Community Coffee Connections. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. It's my first time, and I don't know anything about the content and what's expected.
Well, where we're at right now is just introducing. So where are you from, Jeanette?
I live in Calgary now since 2017.
We're getting them all covered off here. Awesome. And what's your interest in community, Jeanette? Why did you come to the call?
I'm 75, 3/4 of a century old.
Yeah.
and I'm a senior, and I live in my apartment alone. So I'm trying to see about making connections with other people.
It's so hard to make connections in an apartment. I lived in an apartment for a while, and it's just like all those walls between everybody. So I totally understand, Jeanette.
So Casey, why don't you introduce yourself? Why are you here in the call?
Well, first I'm here to interrupt everybody else, as you can see. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm kind of an enthusiastic person. Right now, I am working on a project to work with a local high school and people with lived experience with homelessness and addictions, because they kind of go together, unfortunately, and teachers, to create some kind of learning module that will help high school students better develop more empathy and compassion and knowledge about the humanity of people experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, there's so many ideas that got triggered from all of you that I got lost in which one I should talk about. So just picking up on yours. Okay, Jeanette.
I'm also triggered by, not triggered in a bad way, but really it evokes in what ways I'm interested. I'm a retired French teacher, I retired in 2016 from the Ontario Board of Education, and I moved to Calgary because I have a daughter here who is 50 and she has connections.
So,
I have an idea, Jeanette.
Okay.
May I? Beautiful. So what if you put a notice up on the board and say, est-ce qu'on parle français? Or do you want to learn to speak French? And we'll meet at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays and in the lobby and see what happens.
yeah, awesome idea. I have a couple of other ideas that you've triggered for me as well that sort of fit it. One that fits in your bailiwick, I think, Casey, and the other one, well, it hopefully fits more. So right now we're just launching two major initiatives. One of them is called the Happy Community Project, where we go into a community to shift the story from where it is today, which usually has some sense of marginalization or divisiveness or something like that in it, to one where the community is more connected, belonging, and caring across its differences. And we've done this several times before, so it's not a new project, but we're just launching a new version of, or a new community of this. But one of the things that's new to it is we're putting a measurement system on it, and what we're doing is engaging the youth in the community, high school youth, to actually go out and collect people's stories that we can then use as a measurement for how the story shifts in the community. So that's one thing that we're doing, and another thing that we're doing. This might be more particularly interesting to you, Jeanette, is launching the Good Neighbor app. We're just working through the final little details of it, and the idea of the Good Neighbor app is it's an anti-social media app, which means that we use a little bit of technology to get people doing a lot of talking with each other face to face. One of the places that I know where it works well, because we've already had some experience with this, is in apartment buildings. So rather than putting a poster up, you just put a posting up on this. There's the idea of the app is there's only one-way communication on it. We're getting together for social. I need some help with something, or here's what's going on in our neighborhood, and then people get to respond by saying yes, I'll be there, or no, I won't. And that's about all they can respond. If they want to talk more about it, they got to actually talk to people. So we're just launching that as well.
The second one, yes, the app is very interesting. Yes.
Okay, so I'll put you on our list.
But so we're not talking just seniors, we're talking the good neighbor. So it's intergenerational.
Absolutely. It's
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, so I'll make sure that you're on our first rollout list. Hi, Kathy. Kathy's from New Brunswick. So we're getting all the provinces ticked off here now. So I thought today's conversation, without taking more time here, is we talk about how it's possible to actually make community a higher priority in our society. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but I'd like to bring out a couple of examples where this is actually happening to show that it's actually practical. So in Wales, England, they have a new legislation. It's about a year old now. That I forget. Of course, I forget the name of it. But it's the purpose of the legislation is that any laws that we make today have to be good for the next generations. Right? So they're not saying the laws that we make today have to be good for economy. They have to be good for the betterment of the people, not just today, but also tomorrow. And New Zealand has this one goes back to, I think, late fall of 2021. So it's not that old either. but it's called an engagement policy, New Zealand engagement policy. And I know, again, I'm not as prepared as I should be maybe here because I can't remember a specific example, but I know of examples where communities have got together and said, we want this to happen in our community, and put it forward under this engagement policy. And the government has responded and made it happen.
Wonderful.
And they actually make this as a priority, a centerpiece of their government, that it's not us government who decides what should happen. It's the people who live in our country who decides what should happen, who live in our communities, who should decide what happens. What a novel idea, huh?
So do we have, well, I live in Canada, in the province of Calgary, so I don't
Yeah.
know if my government has such an engagement policy where we just put forward what we need or what we hope for.
I don't think so. Not that
Okay.
I'm aware of. I'm not aware of anything like this in either of those two things. Either the law that says that the new laws and the old laws are reviewing old laws as well, have to meet the standard that it's good for the next generation. I don't think we have a law like that in Canada. I'm pretty certain we don't. I've talked to some politicians, and they think it's a novel idea, but not something that they're too interested in at the moment. So, but it says that it's possible. And in the engaging, governments always talk about engagement. And what they mean by engagement is one of two things. That we came out to vote. They call that engagement. And the other is that a few special interest groups have filled in a survey, and they call that engagement. But general policy engagement, like New Zealand is doing, no, I don't think so. But I'm thinking that these, there's countries that are leading the way with these kinds of ideas, governments that are leading the way. So they're not crazy ideas anymore, right? Up until now, those would be considered crazy ideas, but they're not crazy ideas anymore. So I'd like to just, open this up for a conversation as to, is it crazy in our country of Canada? Is it a possibility? What would be the road to making it happen if it could happen? And ideas like that. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on the federal level. It can be on the provincial level. It can be on the municipal level. The municipal levels could have, and I think there are municipalities that actually do have policies like this. I can think of a couple of them that do. I think Cambridge, Ontario is one of them, and Yarmouth, Nova Scotia is another one that actually have focused policy that it's community well-being first. I think Toronto has done a relatively good job of it until the mayor of Toronto just left. But I think they've been working in that direction. So on the municipal levels, there has been examples in Canada.
I think that before starting the discussion, and I don't know if it's important or not, what do we understand by engagement? Because for different people, engagement means different things. So in society and in communities, what does that mean? What does that mean to engage? Is that just the idea of saying hi in the morning? Or is that working together into a project as Carrie is doing? What we understand as engagement? How do we understand the sense of belonging? And I think that that would be a first question rather than starting with policy, because I think that to make policy, we really need to get to the core of what is expected to be done.
If I can just speak to that, what is engagement, Letitia? I think that's a really good question, because I think governments are reactive in setting up kinds of engagement, and the way they're doing it right now, and certainly in our city, that's what they're doing, is putting out polls and asking questions. And I just wrote something this morning, actually, on the our Council Watch Facebook page, that, you know, asking questions of people, it allows them to gather data that they can use really in any way they want to, if they're broad enough questions. But if you get people in a room together and you get them to imagine your city in 10 years, what would it have in terms of recreation and education and housing and all of those kinds of things, you know, like what kinds of proportions, you know, where would they be, all of those kinds of things. It's much more up here than it is, you know, I would like a park, you know. So it imagines the bigger picture. And I think that's not something you can do in a poll. So I think engagement is face-to-face in a room for some time.
I'm going to add another layer on that, Casey, because I have a different idea of what engagement is. Once upon a time, quite a long time ago, 40, 50 years ago, it was normal for citizens to feel responsible in their community. There was a sense of responsibility for each other and for keeping things going and all that sort of stuff from citizenry. And that has waned considerably over the decades, to the point now where citizen responsibility at the most is to go out and vote and maybe answer a poll, but generally not to get actually feeling that sense of responsibility for my neighbor, for example. That's one example of it that I've witnessed, where I think in Vancouver, you had a deep freeze a couple of years ago, and the people like Jeanette, who were in their apartments and the power was out, got cold. And I think if I remember right, there was even a couple of deaths in that case. And the public response was the government should go and make sure that everybody is safe. Well, that's nuts, for one thing. That's an impossibility. How about a neighbor going and knocking on a door and seeing if the neighbor is safe, right? Once upon a time, that might have been more normal than it is today, than to have the response that the government should. So I think real citizenry engagement is at that level of taking some personal responsibility versus the once every 4 years responsibility.
I agree, and I'll just contextualize what I said. What I was thinking of there was the official community plan, the kind of thing that if the city's planning for 10, 20 years out, you know, rather than go, oh, sure, let's throw this up or that up, or, you know, rather than that, having a bigger picture of what will benefit the community long term. So that's kind of like the New Zealand and Wales approach.
Yeah, let me share the Cambridge, Ontario approach. Okay, you want to say something, Letitia?
And wants to. She has her hand raised.
Oh, okay. Anne, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Anne. I'm not good at noticing these things. Thank you, Letitia.
Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I was going to say that while I agree with what everyone is saying, who do you consider to be in your neighborhood? Who do you actually feel like you're responsible for? Because the landscape has changed drastically in, you know, just the last 10, 20, 30 years. Even just in the last 5 years, the demographic in every single province has changed drastically. And so, you know, I question, like, it's a very nice idea to say we should be responsible for each other, but moving from Toronto to Langley, unfortunately during COVID, I did not feel that kind of support. Not just because of the race and all of that, but it's you know, again, it's a really nice idea, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. But for those who aren't, like, can each one of us really say that I feel responsible for that person that is 2 doors down or 3 doors down?
Um,
The teacher.
I really understand what you're saying, and I think that this is a premise that has been happening with the young generation, especially with all these kind of changes that you are pointing out. I think that the starting point for this sense of engagement is belonging. If you don't feel that you belong, you won't be able to engage. Even if you are living in a community that's very multicultural. And I think that it comes with the values, the memories that we have, and our own heritage. And also something that I have been very aware of is that the sense of us versus them.
Yes.
Yeah.
That tribal idea that us are better than them or are different than them, there is where the problem lays. To answer your questions, how to engage with in an environment that probably you feel hostile, because you feel that coming from Calgary, you do not belong. So first of all is, how do we work with belonging, that sense of belonging, that sense of the place we are in will affect us and benefit us, or the others, because that is something that we always think of, us versus the others. We here, over there.
Yep.
And I think that when we start thinking like shifting the idea of us versus them, there is where we start feeling the sense of belonging.
Yeah. I'd like to share the Cambridge example. It started off with a general citizen who said they wanted their neighborhood. Cambridge is, I think, around 300,000 people or something. It's not a small town. And it started off with some person who wanted to make the area around where she lived better. So she started engaging general citizens and saying, how can we make where we live better in our little area? And then they created projects out of that. And some of the projects needed funding, and they would go to this town hall and see if they could get funding for them, and some of them didn't. And Cambridge, as a political body, recognized what she was doing and gave her a full-time job as executive director of this little area. But other parts of the community started noticing what was going on in this section of Cambridge, and they wanted it in theirs too. So Cambridge set up a rule that said that anybody who works at this for 2 years and has some success in engaging the community, then we will make you an executive director too, and you can run this in your community. And so each one of these not-for-profits, I think they have 13 or 14 of these now in Cambridge, and each one is around 5,000 people. Each one of these, the way they work is they have community area meetings, community discusses what they would like to have happen in their area, and then citizens engage with themselves to figure out how they can make that happen. And so it's not they should do something, it's we should do something about.
That's really interesting, Barry. If I can mention something, I recently saw a YouTube video that raised the idea of, that touches on something Casey mentioned and what you're talking about. It ties in that that apparently an industrialist, or engineer rather, in the States in 1910 named Frederick Taylor changed the idea of people knowing and understand, having expertise themselves, to saying, no, only the top people at the top in this business have the expertise, and the other people can't really be trusted. And according to this video, made an interesting case that ended up pervading throughout North American society, to the point where there's a drift of lacking trust with neighbors, and then it gets sequentially worse with each generation. Whatever sort of the group idea is at the time become the personal beliefs of the next generation. And so there's this cultural drift in North America, and our city physical designs, like the run counter to the idea of community building in many ways. So this sounds like a lot of urban planning ideas.
Yes,
that you're talking about addressing.
Yes, and there are urban Happy City, I think it's called, is a book that was written by an urban planner who gives all kinds of ideas about turning it around from automobile orientated to community orientated, from economic efficiency to people orientated, and that sort of thing. And so there are voices out there that are speaking that same thing. But I'd like to comment on Letitia's comment too about the idea of belonging as a first step to engagement. So in the Cambridge example, the people there were just as disenfranchised as everywhere else and separated from each other as everywhere else. But the force that became the executive director in each one of these areas started bringing people together, so that they started seeing it as not the house that I live in, but the community I live in.
And I think that also the interactions that happen, sometimes even the corner store, where you go, and especially in the pandemic, when we were trying to avoid the big malls and supermarkets, we started to get that sense of belonging, independently of living in an apartment or in a house or in a townhouse. The idea of even having the opportunity to relate to the other, and corner stores are, to me, a very great started to make feeling of belonging and community, where you connect.
I think so. Coffee shops and corner stores, right? It's become the gossip centers for what's going on in the community.
And sometimes you find that you can belong. I think that for the new generation, it's becoming more difficult because of all the communication how they communicate. But even there's a sense of community. As long as they feel that my values and mine and their values are correct, we think that we're belonging. But when we say our values, just all our values are in essence the same, we can make community.
I think those are wonderful points. So we haven't heard from Kathy or Lynn for a little while. You got any thoughts on all these things that's been said here?
Well, I was thinking about the community development and the belonging, and also how structure of your community can affect that as well. I live in an acre outside of Maple Ridge. And development is coming, and that's fine because we're close enough. But a number of years ago, there was I think from the Simon University, they did some studies in different communities, and they picked where I'm from, Yanadin, the community. And they were asking about community. Where do they engage? And they were looking at different communities, and they were quite surprised at Yanadin because Yanadin is primarily made up of lots of acreages.
Right.
So they asked kids about, well, where do you guys hang out? What do you do? Well, in my backyard. Well, they found out that a lot of people have, things out in their backyard that kids are playing on. So there wasn't a community. They didn't really use the school ground as a place to belong because they had all that stuff in their backyard. Then they were finding that a lot of adults, their place of connection was the mailbox. Like there's really not, we don't have a corner store. We've just got a daycare that was put on. So if we get flooded out, we're out hunting bears on our own. There's no food here. But that whole sense of, and I didn't see that as not necessarily a negative thing to see the mailboxes as a community. But I now start looking at it that there's been people I've met in community. And so there's an intentional engagement. Just the practicalities of what does that look like when we do begin to work within the more close-knit, closer community.
Yeah, proximity most certainly helps.
Yeah, there's the concept of the third place, and there's a book on that. That's a well discussed idea, I guess, in urban design, and that's the mailbox or the convenience store, or the pub in the UK, or used to be
Town square.
more common to have churches but a place that's not home, it's not work, it's the third place where everybody can actually congregate, and ideally indoors, because not everyone's going to hang out at the mailbox on the worst day in February.
If I can just spin off that, I just saw an article like 2-3 days ago about the way houses are built now, and it's a little more difficult to fix, but houses now, the newer ones, the thing you see first is the garage door. You don't see the door, right? And so one of the things that somebody was mentioning was, trying to open your garage door in the summertime and sit out with lawn chairs, like some people do, but actually do it intentionally. Because when people are walking by on the street, they'll talk to you and chat, and that's a way to kind of, it's because we're lacking that front porch in the new house designs.
There's been quite a bit of commentary and research that sitting in the front of your house, having your barbecue, attracts a lot more neighborhood connection than having your barbecue in your backyard. For those people that have houses. Kathy, still haven't heard from you. What's your thoughts on all of this?
So we just went through a historic review process in Fredericton. They wanted to update their heritage bylaws and everything. So first thing they did was develop this big survey. And then they had an open house from like 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock one evening, where there were all these boards with different headings on them, and you could put little Post-it notes on it. And I went early, and I noticed that there were a lot of people there, but not many people were putting their Post-it notes on it. And so I asked, how come you're not putting any Post-it notes around? And they said, oh, this is just window dressing. They don't really care what we say. They've done this process so many times. We have a thing called Engage Fredericton or something that puts on these things. The boards all look the same, topics different, the boards all look the same. And we all put up our Post-it notes and we all go away and nothing changes. Anyway, I went around and said to people, right, just put something on the board, put your feelings on the board, everyone put everything on the board. And then I had to go for an appointment, and I came back after supper sort of thing again to do it before I came home to run an online meeting at 7. Like, I was really, because everybody I talked to, even if I knew them or not, they said they weren't going to put anything on. So I just sort of forced everybody. Anyway, the report came back yesterday, and they have mentioned St. Mary's Ferry Landing, which is the little historic neighborhood that I represent. It's only 5 blocks wide, 1.5 blocks deep, but it's in a very strategic part of the city on the north side. And it's so they came back they mentioned us in it, and one of the recommendations mentioned us, and it looks like we're going to be a little sample. They're going to do something with our neighborhood around more community engagement and try to come up with some creative ideas to do something in our neighborhood, and use us as a model for the way they're going to deal with other neighborhoods in the city. It's sort of
Sure.
A lot of different things like that. So I think
It's awesome that you got the politicians actually engaged in your community, because I've seen I've seen that exact same process in other communities, and particularly in one where they made it a vision statement. Lots of people did engage in it. I'd asked the mayor and the councillors a year later about the vision, and they really didn't know what I was talking about, even though they spent $60,000 in consulting fees to create it.
So the university professor who teaches sociology at one of our universities found out we were St. Mary's Ferry. I was dealing with him about something else, and he's really interested to have coffee to talk about us as like a social experiment. So
Awesome.
kind of neat.
That's great. Can I quickly ask, does that relate to the response of the sticky notes? Was there a big response, and was that why this happened?
There wasn't a huge response, but a lot of people talked about their disappointment in other processes like this. And then people did mention St. Mary's Ferry Landing because they thought they've lost Officer Square, they've lost the Racine building, and they thought we're the next place to be, and we should be given some ear, and people should pay attention to us.
Awesome. So
Cool.
hopefully they follow through on that, and it becomes inspiring for the rest of Fredericton. And so I wanted to sort of do a quick kind of wrap up. I found this conversation myself incredibly interesting, switching from where I went to engagement, to belonging, to down to the community level of action, and that sort of thing. So I found it incredibly inspiring for myself, but I'd love to get your commentary on it as well. Any last thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everybody, because each time I come away thinking about things and scribbling ideas, and it really supports me. So I appreciate comments everybody's making.
So before anybody starts rushing off, let me say one other thing. We meet on the first Thursday of the month. So there is going to be another Coffee Connections on the first Thursday of, where are we, April already. And I'm thinking from the nature of this conversation, it might be about creating belonging in community. I really picked up on Letitia's idea there, and I think that might be a good topic for that one, is how do we create greater belonging in community? So yeah, if you want, check out happycommunitybuilders.com and explore there, where there are many of us who share this common interest.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Barry. Bye.